Hey guys, CJ here, and in this video I'm going to finally show you how you can successfully change the spark plugs on the GSX650F. Unlike my first attempt where I failed miserably, that video is linked below if you want to check it out. I've also put all the tools and the parts needed down there too. Tools you'll need for the first part are a socket handle, a 10mm socket, a size 4 Allen or hex key, and a flathead screwdriver. For the main part, you'll need a torque wrench set to 11 Newton meters, a socket handle, a small socket extension, a larger socket extension, a universal socket joint, a 10mm spark plug socket, and a tool to get the spark plugs out. So the first thing we need to do is disconnect both indicators. Then we can remove the 5 bolts from the right fairing. Then you remove the 4 bolts from the left fairing. Then it's the 3 push rivets at the bottom. And now we can remove the 2 side fairings. Next we remove the seat. And now we have access to the 2 tank mounting bolts, which need to be removed with a 10mm socket. We now need to place a rag under the fuel tank so we can disconnect the fuel feed hose. There will be a small amount of fuel that comes out, but it should stop after a few seconds. Next we need to disconnect the fuel tank air breather hose and the water drain hose. And the last item before removing the fuel tank is to disconnect the fuel pump lead wire coupler. A tip for this one is to squeeze the end, push it in and then pull it out. Next we remove the 2 bolts from the frame head cover. It's worth noting that the front bolt is longer than the rear one for when you put this part back later. We do the same again on the other side. Now I found it useful to remove the 2 bolts holding the thermostat housing in place, just to give me a bit more room to access the middle left spark plug. We can now disconnect the lead wire coupler from the ignition coil cap. Now we can remove the ignition coil. As you can see, it does take a bit of effort to pull it out, but it will come eventually. For the spark plug removal, you'll need the spark plug socket with a small extension to attach to the handle. It's worth noting that there is a lot of thread to unscrew. Now I had to use this claw tool to get the plug out, but if you don't have one of these, a magnetic screwdriver head should also do the trick. Now the new plugs I brought had this additional cap on the top, which I had to remove to ensure they were the same as the old ones. I was overly cautious when placing the plugs back in. As long as you drop them in gently, you should be fine. You can then tighten the plug using the socket and extension by hand. And then finish it off with the torque wrench set to 11 Newton meters. For me, it was literally a few turns before it clicked and was tight enough. We can now replace the ignition coil. Make sure you really push it down to ensure it connects with the spark plug. The other outside spark plug is also nice and easy, and you follow the same steps as before. You disconnect the lead wire coupler and then remove the ignition coil, and then using the socket and extension, unscrew and remove the spark plug. Place the new spark plug back in, tighten by hand, finish off with the torque wrench and replace the ignition coil. Now the middle right plug was slightly more awkward than the last two, purely because of the lack of space around the plug, but it is the same steps as before. Disconnect the lead wire coupler, remove the ignition coil. To remove this plug, I needed another extension with a universal joint on the end, which I then connected to the small extension and the spark plug socket. This gave me the extra space to attach the handle and unscrew the plug. Now I definitely would not recommend using this tool for the middle two spark plugs, as it took me much longer to get the plug out than it should have done. A magnetised screwdriver would have done a much better job here. Once it's out, you can replace it with the new one, and the same as before, tighten it by hand and finish off with the torque wrench. Then replace the ignition coil, ensuring a good tight connection with the plug. So it's safe to say the middle left spark plug is by far the worst one to remove, purely because it has even less space than the middle right spark plug. But again, you will need the second extension and universal joint to unscrew this plug. Like before, this also took a long time to remove, but it was worth the persistence because it definitely needed changing. Now we can drop the new plug in, tighten by hand, finish with the torque wrench, and then replace the ignition coil. We can now reconnect the lead wire couplers to all the ignition coils. And now we can start putting everything back, beginning with the left frame head cover. Remember, the longer bolt goes on the front and the shorter one goes at the back. And it's the same again for the right frame head cover. Next we replace the two bolts holding the thermostat housing bracket in place. Then it's on to the tank. Start by reconnecting the fuel pump lead wire coupler, followed by the air breather hose and the water drain hose. And then move around to the other side and reconnect the fuel feed hose. Now we can put the tank back in place and re-screw the two tank mounting bolts in. And now we can put the seat back in place. And finally we can replace the two fairings. Insert the three push rivets, followed by the four bolts on the left panel, and then the 5 bolts on the right. And to make sure you finish by reconnecting the two indicators. I hope you guys found this video useful. It'd be great if you could let me know by commenting, liking and subscribing. Now whilst the channel is still nice and small, I literally do get back to every one of you who comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. If you want to know why you should be checking and changing your spark plugs, make sure you check out this video. I'll put a link in the description below. Thanks, see ya.